I think the interesting point that I found in your manifesto was the 4,000 vacant and derelict lots. Do you want to expand on that a small bit? Because it's not just your constituency of Dublin Central, it's high streets up and down the country.
Yeah. And it's a particularly knotty issue because it overlaps with issues like probate, for example. And, you know, we don't have a digitalised probate system. Like if you write a will, you can just have it in your home. And let's say if you look at the UK, they have a register for probate. So if you write a will, it's there. So often I will knock on a door and I know that building has been empty for 8 or 10 years and the neighbours will say, well, that lady now passed away and they just haven't worked out the probate. That's incredibly frustrating in the middle of a homelessness crisis. So we would do very practical things like digitise probate. And conveyancing actually would be fantastic to get that digitised too. Also look to expand the buy and repair scheme, which means that you can get a fund of money to take on a derelict vacant house. You know, even houses that aren't technically derelict, if they have been empty for 4, 5, 6 years, you know, the roof starts to kind of degrade, the services aren't great, the electricity can kind of fall asunder. You do need a pot of money. We did assign in the last 5 years quite a bit of money to those kind of schemes. We'd like to see them expanded and actually more staff within that office because they definitely need it. Like, people are raring to go to bring buildings back into use, but they need the state to support them.
So I guess the question would be, given that you've been in government for the last 4 years, why has this not been done? And why is it being proposed now? Why hasn't it, like the housing crisis hasn't disappeared?
No, that's a very, very fair question. But since 2020, there has been action on it. So there has been a huge fund for that repair and renew scheme. We have, for the first time ever, brought in a tax on vacancy. I would suggest that tax needs to hike way up. But there is a tax on vacancy and there's also a tax on derelict sites. Now, that is a good example, the derelict site tax, of how we need to do more work on this, because in Dublin Central, a lot of the sites would be very small sites. Now, you could build multiple homes on those sites, but it's a national policy and the calibration of that means that it actually misses a lot of sites in Dublin Central. So there is huge amount of work in terms of bringing buildings back into reuse. We would also like to see, a real one-stop shop effect, which is something that we've done on retrofit that has worked really well. You go to one person or one office and they'll tell you all the information, and that's really how you get to a better place on it.
Mm-hmm. This is you're currently still suspended from the parliamentary.
No, I'm in the parliamentary party.
You're in
the
party now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went back in September.
Do you envision yourself being suspended again in the next parliament if you get re-elected?
That's a hard one.
It's one of those, right, where it's twice you were suspended, right?
Yeah, 3 times actually.
3 times.
Yeah, twice on the eviction ban and once on the National Hospital.
At what point does it then come to be a question in your conscience of whether you should be within the Green Party or not?
That's a very fair question, one I get on the doors every so often. Look, any minority party in government, it's a tricky situation to be in, and certainly as a backbencher, you don't actually have a lot of sway or power, and you have to decide when you're going to utilise whatever sway you have at a particular moment. I think that the lifting of the eviction ban wasn't the right decision, and for me, because I represent Dublin Central people who, homelessness it's probably the constituency that experiences the most issues with homelessness. It was worth it to me to, push that nuclear button and say, look, this is too far from our stated political project. I think, I don't regret that, because I think that has been borne out. Like, we could have a ban on no fault evictions, and homelessness has risen. So I think in that specific case, it was worth it to me. However, having got to the end of 5 years, I look back now and I think, God, that was a very difficult, very stressful time. But my God, we got a lot done in government. Like, we really, for 12 people in a government of 82, 83, 84, depending, we really pushed that government to the progressive edge of where we could and got huge amounts of work done, not just on climate, but on public transport and on housing. Like, all that cost rental stuff that Fianna Gael and Fianna Fáil are very happy to point to now. That was us. That was our idea. We pushed it through. I was in the negotiation room when we pushed that through, and it was a hard sell. I tell you that. And so I look back now, and things like the land hoarding tax. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, some of the principles that we managed to push through in the lifetime of this government will have a massive impact. And as difficult as it was, I kind of think it was worth it.
if the polls are to be believed, your party could be facing a similar fate to what Labour had when they last were in a coalition government. It's not predicted that it's going to be a wipeout like 2011, but a significant depletion in Green Party representatives in government. What does that say to how the left and centre left kind of operate within coalition governments with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and how does it kind of inform the way the party is moving into this election?
I think actually the Green Party has bucked the trend in terms of being absolutely annihilated after going into minority party in a larger government. Obviously, we didn't just have one large party to deal with, we had two. And that was tricky in itself. And if the polls are to be believed, as you say, we're not going to get completely destroyed. We might have less. I think that's realistic. But that green voice will still be in the Dáil. And it's really important because the climate crisis isn't over in 5 years. We got a huge amount done. We managed to push a massive amount over the line. But the climate crisis continues, and it'll be one of the biggest challenges of our era, of our generation. And it is important that we're still there fighting away. The aftermath of being the minority party in government is always an interesting place to be. As I said, we got a huge amount of our policies over the line. But I think we might buck the trend in that thing of, being decimated and also having completely maybe lost your perspective or your political project. Because certainly if you look at Labour post when they went in 2011 and after that time, I think they're still maybe recovering from that. And I think the Greens, their political project, what we aimed to do, what we said we were going to do in 2020, that still exists. Like, we're running this campaign and this election in terms of, look what we did. We said we would do A, B and C. Here's A, B and C, completed, done. Here you go. And that's not a bad place to be.
I guess when you look at what the Green Party have done and what the Green Party are planning to do, a lot of focus is on transport, infrastructure. These kinds of things may be fair to say that there's a neglect of rural communities in some way, of like farming communities. You see things all across Europe and in the UK as well of farmers' protests, this kind of like the changing of how the European Union and the UK operates with its farming communities. How does that sit with the Green Party, that there's kind of obviously things like animal agriculture and stuff have a massive impact on the environment, but with an economy and a culture like Ireland's, it's quite difficult for a party like the Green Party to break through in those communities.
Yeah, look, I think the way to break through in those communities is to work on the things that we are really good at. And in the lifetime of this government, there was a new bus link put into rural Ireland every week during the lifetime of this government. And we work on the basis that in every town and village, it should be every hour, every village. And, we have not quadrupled, what is the 5 times version of quadrupled, quintupled the amount of public transport in rural Ireland. And I think that's how you do it. It's not an identity politics competition. It's about, real impacts on the ground. We've also tripled the funding for organic farming. And if you look, for example, at the protests in the UK at the moment, I mean, that's about inheritance tax. Now, we absolutely recognise that small and medium farmers should be able to pass on their farms, and Ireland has very favourable versions of that, and we support those. You should be able to generationally, something we talk about a lot because we're often talking about 5 to 10 years time, you should be able to generationally pass on your land. We completely support that. But we also believe in inheritance tax. We believe in progressive taxation where people who have contribute to people who have not, and we're unashamed about that. I think in the long term, what's facing rural Ireland in terms of farming particularly are issues like flooding and issues like soil quality. And we might find, and I think maybe the farming community might find, that their best allies on issues like that might be the Greens, because we take flooding incredibly seriously. We take soil quality incredibly seriously, and we work with our European Green parties on those issues. So, I think it's a watch this space situation, because in the next 10 to 15 years, the rate of climate change and the way in which our climate is changing will mean that there will be huge amounts of pressure on food production in this country, and things from water quality to soil quality are going to become very challenging for farmers, and it might be the Greens who help them out.
Mm-hmm. Your party's been part of government for the last 5 years. Obviously, a big news story this year was the Apple tax. One of the big industries in this country is from multinational corporations. Recently, you had in the United States Donald Trump be elected. His new tip for Secretary of Commerce has come out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, talking about the economic situation of Ireland and the American multinationals that operate in Ireland. Is that something that you're concerned about in the next 5 or 6 years, or 4 years if we're going by the term of the president, but a pressure being put on American multinationals in this country it will impact obviously the tax revenue that this country benefits from those companies, but also will greatly change possibly the way parties can propose change in policies themselves. Are you concerned by what's coming from America in that way?
I am concerned about that. I think Ireland has relied on FDI tax receipts for quite a while now, and we're seeing it creep into manifestos at the moment, whereby effectively current expenditure is being proposed from what is effectively windfall taxes. And during the lifetime of this government, it was ourselves who argued for a commission on tax and welfare, and they were certainly and that report was very critical around Ireland's reliance on that type of tax. And we believe that there are a number of things that we can action within this country to insulate ourselves from the impacts of that. So one is to lean into research and development with our pharma organisations, with the corporations that are here, to ensure that they have links and ties to Ireland that don't necessarily bind them to the country, but make this an increasingly good place to stay, because we are the launch pad, we are in the Anglosphere into Europe for many of those organisations, and that's probably not going to change. It will still be within their interest to stay here, but we have to foster those relationships. But on the other side, Ireland has to start taking our small and medium enterprise domestically more seriously. Like, we don't have very high levels of productivity within that sector. We could be doing more there. The Green Party believe that one of the issues there is access to credit, and one way to do that is to stop relying on pillar banks and to look at public banking. Capitalising a regional public bank would be something between 70 and 90 million. We have all those Apple taxes, we could do that. That would make really low cost credit available, not just to to small and medium enterprises, but to social enterprise and actually to farming.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there about the Apple tax. You mentioned previously the idea to get the Metrolink up and running. You also, within government, proposed the Ireland 2040 plan for transport infrastructure. If the Metrolink is anything to go by, why should anyone believe that the transport networks proposed in the last government will actually be put into place at any stage in the next 100 years?
I mean, look, it's really easy to be cynical about transport projects, but you can see in the lifetime of the 5 years where the Greens were there, like, public transport has taken off. Like, there's 1 million people using public transport every day in this country. So you can see that change is possible. It is getting better. And Metrolink is forging ahead. Like, the railway orders have gone ahead. The Lewis extension has gone to planning permission, which would go, extend from Broombridge right out to Finglas. Dart Plus is coming from Glasnevin through Cabra to Houston. As I said, the rural link has increased by 5 times fold, and we're aiming towards every hour in every village. Change is possible. It does feel like it takes 1 million years because public transport does take a long time. That level of infrastructural investment does take a long time. But I moved into Cabra in 2005, and the Lewis wasn't even meant to come our way. It was meant to go, I think, down by Fagan's, maybe closer to Bertie's stomping ground. And then it came our way, and it was opened in 2017, and I have to say it was life-changing. Like, I have a kid who has a disability, and it's a mobility. She's a cane user, and the Lewis has been transformative for her. And we never expected it. We never thought it would come, and yet we use it every day. I travel everywhere on the Lewis. So we can get there. it's not fast though, and you have to stay the course. And I think that's why the Greens continuously talk about public transport so much, is because we know that without us putting that focus on it, it's so easy to put it on the back burner.
On Palestine, you mentioned earlier on that the Green Party has an unwavering support for Palestine for a ceasefire, release of the hostages. Earlier on this year, Eoin Ryan, the former leader of the party, was the Minister for Transport, and there were reports that there were cargo planes flying over Irish airspace with weapons destined for the IDF. Is that not a double standard on the part of the Green Party?
I definitely think that there is an ongoing issue there, and certainly that was in the room in 2020 with ourselves and Simon Coveney around the inspection of airplanes. And there is a huge challenge in terms of simply moving through airspace as opposed to, let's say, stopping and having an opportunity to inspect airplanes. And certainly in 2020 there was a repeated answer to our concerns that there is simply no evidence of that happening. And this year, I think what we were presented with was a certain amount of evidence, and now there's a proposal for new legislation. I welcome that legislation a lot, because I can tell you from knocking on doors in Dublin Central, Gaza and Palestine comes up all the time. I don't think I've ever done a canvass where you might knock on 100 doors in 3 hours or 2 hours. I don't think I've ever done that, and Gaza and Palestine and people's distress around that issue, it hasn't come up. People in Ireland really care, and we definitely do not want to be complicit in that, and I would welcome any further things that we can do to stop that happening.
How much does immigration come up on the doors? Because of course the Green Party has the brief for immigration as well.
Immigration does come up on the doors, and there's a spectrum around immigration, and that goes right from the wonderful people, and I'm just thinking of like the Fibsborough for All people who, you know, when that there was an issue during the summer around that, like they all came together and were so incredible around it. It goes from the people who are very, very worried about the increasing rise of the far right and really want to help and be active in their community to welcome people into their community, right through people maybe who are more in the centre and worried about resources. And, you know, I kind of get that. If it's somebody who, you know, doesn't have a GP themselves, and they're like, well, why are we bringing more people who also need a GP? How am I going to get on the list? I kind of get that, right up to some pretty horrible and objectionable views. And I think everybody except the objectionable, like just full-on xenophobia and racism, everybody else, I think, you know, we can work to address those issues. I think it's incredibly important that we hold the line, particularly that centre-left grouping, that we work together to hold the line that we have to deal with immigration on a human rights basis. It has to be rooted in dignity and respect. It has to be a system that is fair and fast and we can all trust in, and that we have to work towards a system where, you know, when people arrive, we're not expecting them to sleep on the street. And certainly the level of immigration that we've had in the last few years meant that the state has struggled on that. But we have a plan going forward for 14,000 state provided beds, and a clear vision that the state has a responsibility here. We have a moral and legal obligation to do that, and that we shouldn't resile from that. And we have to have a sense of clarity that there's a responsibility there. And, you know, we can have no truck. We can give no recourse to xenophobia in any way on this issue.
I had Labour in here earlier on, and the candidate was talking about how his party is planning to sit down with all the left and centre-left parties post-election to try and form a bloc to go to the bigger parties to form a coalition with. What would the Green Party's position on that be? Or do you think there is still a sense within the Green Party and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that there's possibly a Mark II version of the government that already exists?
Mark II of the current government, honestly, I doubt we will have the numbers. And personally, I have learned through the last 5 years that learning to count in politics is everything. And I certainly always want to work. I think it's a faster way of achieving your goals if you work with people who are closer to your goals anyway. And certainly, there are a number of parties on the left and centre left that I think align very closely with our values. They might not have the full focus on climate that I would want, or the full focus on public transport or housing that I would want. But generally, we're closer aligned than maybe, for example, Fine Gael. And I think that there's there's a straight line then to agreement that means that you're going to get more out of, you're going to get more bang for your buck. So I'm open to some kind of a conversation around that. I honestly don't think that now that we have more TDs, the majority is going to be 88, 89 maybe. Yeah. I personally don't think that the current three parties will reach that number. And I do think that they'll be casting around, I suppose.
They haven't fielded enough candidates anyway, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. And to be honest with you, I think a much more likely scenario is that Independent Ireland and Aontú, for example, would form an alliance and make some kind of a negotiation with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I think actually that's very likely to happen. And you heard, like in 2020...
substantial enough voter base
I do.
to be able to do that?
I do. I think they might. I think that's all to play for on the 29th. I think you hear, let's say, Micheál Martin, I heard today say, we won't go into coalition with Aontú, but he said that about Fine Gael, So I think it's much more likely that centre-right, and I would say not centre, fully right in Aontú would, and in Independent Ireland would form an alliance. And, there's been a huge amount of criticism of this government. And obviously I had my own problems with this government and got turfed out a few times. But if we hadn't been in there, it would have had a different flavour completely. And I think the next 5 years you could see not a centre-left government, but a centre-right government. And that might be something for people to consider, because you can then forget about public transport, you can forget about like a massive increase in social housing or cost rental, you can forget about a focus on climate or emissions, and you can probably forget about childcare. I don't think we're going to move anything on childcare with that flavour of government. So hopefully on the 29th that's not what happens, but certainly when we're talking about caucusing, like coming together as individual parties, I don't think people should be worried too much about the Greens and Labour and maybe Soc Dems, who align quite closely. Should actually be worried about Independent Ireland and Aontú.